So, welcome everybody. We have just a few people still entering. Just waiting for the last people to get in. And okay, so welcome to this webinar of the Biourbanism series. I am very, very happy for this event because I'm so happy to have found Olusegun. Is a little gem that come to the world of architecture and biourbanism. So we're very happy to have this window over critical thinking in the African continent. Many people wrote me, they say, we know nothing about Africa, African architecture, African design, etc. Many people were very curious about that. And it's not just because they but Olive have a very interesting production despite being so young. And I'm very moved also because we have some exceptional people listening to her. Very many thanks to Robert Newert, writer, scholar, researcher, journalist, I don't know how to define him. He's traveling the world and he made it. He made it to this event. So I'm very excited for that. Thank you, Rob. Then Marco Casagrande is going to join us later, I think.
Actually, and, I'm here.
Oh, you're there, Marco. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm struggling with the camera, but my soul is there.
Show your beautiful face, please.
I'm trying, but my soul is there already.
Olive, as I told you, Marco is the craziest architect I never met in my life, in all the positive sense of the term. So from Finland. And then we're waiting for Sergio Loss. I think he's a little bit late, but he will meet us too. Okay, so the subject of this discussion will be a very interesting subject. It comes directly from the thesis of Olive. She has been working, she graduated last year in architecture. The subject is architecture as language, Afromodern architecture, and Afrocentric ideologies in public space. Of course, she won't present the entire thesis, but she will pick up some subjects that are interesting in order to launch a discussion. And the discussion will be organized so that Rob, Marco, and Sergio will put some questions. And so we unfold the discussion. And if you also, other people have questions, we'd be very happy to receive also them. I see also that we have here the president of the Italian Society of Bioarchitecture, Anna Carulli. I'm very grateful for that. So very nice to see many friends. I cannot tell the name of everybody, but Willy, Pavel, Eleni. So great, Tatiana. Okay, so Olive, up to you. If you have a presentation, I give you the role. Let me see. So you become director of the presentation. Here you go. Here you are.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stefano. Good evening, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to start off my presentation by telling you a little bit about myself because my research is really informed by my experiences. So my full name is Olive Anna Oluwatoyin Olusegun, and I know it's quite a mouthful, but my experience has been that I'm Nigerian, Kenyan, and South African. I was born in Kenya. My family is Nigerian, and I've lived in South Africa for most of my life since about 2006. And one of the main observations that I kind of had growing up was that in the cities that I was inhabiting in the African context, there were a lot of spaces that weren't really perpetuating or capturing African cultures, and not only in aesthetics, but also in program and paradigms and ideologies. So my research interest emerged from contesting non-places. And non-places, sorry?
Oh, I think somebody has the audio on. Please turn off your audio so we don't disturb the presentation. Thank you.
Right. So yes, so my research interest kind of emerged from this observation, and it started as a contestation of non-places. So non-places is a classification theory that was developed by Marc Auger and Rem Koolhaas, and it can simply be described as places that are disconnected from their context, both culturally, sociopolitically, and even geographically. And my added definition is that non-places perpetuate the erasure of local cultures, and they use architecture as a tool for seduction to mask the erroneous systems that they propagate. And in my master's, what I focused on was the non-place of the mall, as it's an increasingly dominating public space in South Africa. And in my exploration, I first started off by deconstructing the mall in several ways, including, the several spatial tactics that they use to seduce people into buying more. I created this speculative drawing to reflect the reality of what malls and consumerism do. And what this is called, it's called Coke World. It's a drawing that I did by hand. And what it does is that it tries to demonstrate how consumerism on the surface looks really exciting and alluring, but on closer inspection, each of these building-sized consumer products tell allegorical narratives of the detriments of this lifestyle. So, for example, the Coke bottle that's in the middle, at the top, you can see people surfing, having a good time, but the more they drink Coke, the heavier their body mass gets, and they sink to the bottom of the Coke bottle from obesity, and then they're sucked into this tube and converted into money. So it's a really kind of tongue-in-cheek narrative, but it's supposed to reflect what, this actually does. And then the other exploration that I did, which I won't go into detail of, it's called the Siskai Gift Shop. And essentially it was a commentary on how African cultures, when they are present in the mall, they're several times gimmicked or commodified or really superficial, displayed for white tourist audiences, as opposed to kind of an embodiment in the architecture and the program. So in order to understand my work contextually, which right now is really based in South Africa, you have to understand apartheid, and you have to understand apartheid urban planning. And apartheid essentially embodied the ideology of racial segregation, and that was translated into the urban planning. So even when laws and policies changed after apartheid, that was done in 1994, because of the spatial legacy of apartheid, this ideology that was converted into urban planning still exists today. So this diagram, which was made in 1958, is about the racial segregation of white people in very high socioeconomic developed areas versus African people that were segregated to underdeveloped areas, which in the city context is predominantly townships. And this was an aerial image. It's very famous. It was on the cover of Times Magazine in 2019 by John Nee Miller. And it shows this real, separation of underdeveloped, predominantly Black areas, and then really highly developed areas, which a lot of the times is the suburbs, even in city areas. And then the other observation in relation to my research was that, number one, malls are now increasingly being constructed in townships, which were, the underdeveloped Black areas. But the township itself is not being developed. So it seems really exploitative and extractive economically. And then the other, which is more of a global trend, is that malls, in terms of their size, are starting to almost take this characteristic of cities in terms of how much they try to contain in terms of program. So these are kind of the observations and the things that I observed at the beginning of my research study. And fundamentally, it can be captured both in the statement and the research question. In this, the mall is increasingly becoming the dominating public space of leisure in South African cities, consequently ritualizing African people into American consumerism to their detriment. How can urban planning, architecture, and design methodologies instead generate and propagate Afromodernity for the benefit of African people in several dimensions, not just, aesthetically and superficially, but rather ideologically, programmatically, culturally, and even more? So the first thing that I did was that I kind of extrapolated the programs that shopping malls contain, and also how they almost try to, accommodate a lot of programs. And I observed what they do, and then I kind of made propositions about what could be done alternatively that could propagate, African programs. So I won't go into detail because the drawings kind of tell the story, but there's leisures of wonderment, and that idea has to do with public spaces where people are allowed to stroll, loiter, have conversations. That might seem like a given, but in shopping malls, you're constantly orientated to buying and consuming. And that's not always something that's available, especially in townships. Food production has to do with, provocations of ideas of free food sites as opposed to, necessarily having to buy things from the mall. And also the fact that a lot of food produced in the mall and given from the mall is overproduced and has a lot of bad health implications. Craft production and distribution is similar in the sense that, what local products can be made and what methods can be used so that people value what they have as opposed to consuming, discarding, which has a lot of environmental impacts. And then entertainment, sports and games. There's a lot of indigenous sports in South Africa and generally in Africa that haven't gotten the infrastructure that they need in order to be modernized. And sport is a really fantastic way of community development. So what public spaces and infrastructure can embody that? Some of them are Dibeka and Timor. I'll go into them in the drawings. And then entertainment, song and dance, similar concept. And transport, which seems, maybe like it's disconnected from the mall, but a lot of malls were built with automobiles in mind. So they're kind of codependent. So the idea of public transport, which is a universal urban principle, but is not present in a lot of our cities, perpetuating ideas of public transport that works really well. So my work, and right now I'm going to kind of talk about methodology because I don't really believe only in focusing on the product, but really about the process. My work is Afromodernity as opposed to Afrofuturism because I believe that the interventions that I'm proposing, as radical as they are, they can happen right now. But my work has drawn a lot from Afrofuturism. And one of the things that it's drawn from is this graph. So this graph was created by Emily Roos in her thesis in 2020. And essentially what it does is that it's a graph that almost has, two polars. There's local versus global, and there's speculative versus realistic. And she gives 4 examples of different projects and she hierarchizes them in terms of their contribution to Afrofuturism. So a very realistic and local project, for example, is the Arts and Culture Center in a township in South Africa, in Cape Town, and that has real life beneficial implications for the community. It's constructed, it's built, it's tangible. Whereas Shanti Mega Structure and Wakanda, I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but these are kind of hypotheticals. They're speculations, they're visuals of, futuristic African context. And then Zeitsmoke is another example of a global realistic. So this is example of Afrofuturistic work, both tangible and intangible. And then this, feel free to ask me about it, but I'll just briefly touch on it. This is a pre-colonial cosmology of time that's called the Dikenga dia Congo. And there's a lot of layers to it, but fundamentally for the purpose of this work, it has to do with this idea that time is cyclical as opposed to linear. And one goes through these 4 cycles of life. So what I did was that I combined Emily Roos's graph and the Dikenga dia Congo to create a new project life cycle for architecture in relation to Afromodernity, but possibly also, oh, sorry, I think something, can you still see my screen? Because it says something has changed. Can I reshare? Okay. All right. Okay. Great. We're back. So, yes, so what I did was that I combined the Dikenga dia Congo and the local speculative graph to create a new project's life cycle. And essentially this life cycle is, it values both the speculative and the realistic in the sense that as opposed to having projects that only are realistic, only are speculative, a project can go through all of these cycles to get the benefit of all of them. And it'll make a lot more sense in each of the examples that I give. So my project goes through all of these 4 cycles. So the first one is global speculative. Global speculative, if I can just simplify it, is that it's not rooted in a particular context. It's speculative, it's imaginary, it's not necessarily realistic or confined to the laws of, gravity or so on. And this drawing, which is called a seclivational plaxonometric, it's a combination of a plan, a section, an elevation, and an axonometric, and it's a generative way of creating speculative ideas. And I can talk about this drawing a lot, but I'll just touch on its relevance to the work today. This drawing started from the understanding that a lot of ground area has been dedicated to privatized spaces. And then combined with this kind of programmatic index is what generated this drawing. And this drawing generated 4 urban manifestos that informed the rest of the design process. So the first one is called Everything That Touches the Ground is Public. That's a provocation that says nothing that is a privatized space can touch the ground. And that almost frees the ground space in terms of, program, in terms of interaction, in terms of movement. It's a provocation. Form follows fun. This one, feel free to ask me about it, but it kind of has to do with the idea that you can read the form at multiple scales, from the molecular to the scale of the city, is fun, and fun means something that is both beneficial in the short term and the long term, and thus this allows for constructs that may be enjoyable now, but detrimental later, which consumerism, doesn't necessarily allow, because a lot of it is enjoyable now, but bad later. Then the fourth is architecture and infrastructure as art. Art is defined as something that's educational and beautiful. And then the last is the city itself becomes entertainment. So as opposed to the mall being this enclave that contains entertainment, entertainment should be something that is enjoyed in the city as one moves through the city. So the next one is local speculative, and this takes all of the lessons from the first and translates it into a condition of site. So not a particular site, but a condition of the site. So the site that was studied was a street in Alexandria in a township. And what was extracted from this was that even though Alexandria is a township that's significantly underdeveloped, the street life is so robust, especially compared to, the dull suburban streets that are just dominated by, automobiles and occasional joggers. There are people that are playing checkers on the side of the road. Vendors use really, ingenious ways of setting up and engaging people. This one vendor at the bottom left corner, as opposed to going to him, he comes to you. He has all of the stuff in his trolley and he moves around. And transport is informal minibuses, which we call taxis. So all of these informed this drawing, and this drawing is an exploration. It's also speculative, but it takes everything before it and it translates into this. So for example, the Everything That Touches the Ground is Public urban manifesto was converted into an idea of what if we had fruit trees along, the streets and cities, and this combined with the idea of free food and free food production, what if that allowed for people to just have, fruit directly from trees on streets in the city? It's a lot more complex than that, but it's a provocation. And then the other one, which a lot of people in South Africa, including my friends or lecturers, really liked, was Mkomboti. Mkomboti is a traditional Xhosa or Zulu drink that's from pasteurized cow milk, and traditionally it's made in a calabash. The industrial one doesn't taste as good, but the traditional one is made in a calabash. So the speculative idea is, what if you had a building-sized calabash? A calabash is usually something you carry in your hand. But what if you had a building-sized calabash that was for the production of Mkomboti in the city? And the building itself, in terms of its architecture, would be beautiful, but also educational in terms of showing that this is how traditional Mkomboti is made. And this would be taken around by women holding calabashes, which you'll see in the bottom left corner, bottom right corner. So the idea of these speculative drawings is that they are provocations that should be used by everybody that would be inhabitants of the city. So as opposed to architectural drawings that generally disconnect people, this drawing is supposed to capture people, and all of the people in terms of these different categories, from pedestrians to developers, all of them should use this drawing as a point of discussion about speculations about the city. So it's not supposed to be a definitive design proposition, but rather the idea that everybody should contribute to the design and understanding of how the city should function. And this is a provocational and engaging tool to do that with. So this is both of the speculative provocations. So then the next one, which is the third quadrant, is the local realistic. The local realistic is, because this is a student project, it's still quite radical, but it is rooted in a particular space locally. So just to recollect, this was an ideological framework of apartheid urban planning. Black people, African people in one area, separated by a buffer zone from white areas. What I did was that I took a contemporary map of a space in Johannesburg, which is Sandton and Alexandra, and I tested if those segregation, indexes were still happening using those same codifications. And I discovered that, yes, this still is the case. There's still a predominant amount of Black people living in underdeveloped Alexandra. They're separated by this M1, which is the highway that's the buffer zone to Sandton, which is an extremely affluent area. It has the richest square mile in Africa. A lot of people from Alexandra will walk to Sandton to work, but they don't live there. They don't necessarily benefit from it. So the provocation was, what if this buffer zone, which is the highway, which was intended historically to separate, what if it was actually inhabited? And what if it was actually a space that created a new space, which would be called Salexandra, Sandton and Alexandra.
I love this girl.
And so the provocation was that the buildings along the highway would be retrofitted, which is to change their use, but gradually over time. So you can see there's an alphabetical order to this development, and the idea behind that is called radical incrementalism. And as opposed to a development kind of just happening just like that, it almost has a catalytic effect. So one thing informs the other, informs the other. And in this case, the red dots represent female trees. And I'll talk about that just now. But essentially planting of female trees which produce fruit. And because of the production of fruit, you need people to harvest that fruit. You need spaces in which that fruit would be washed and stored. So then the buildings would be retrofitted for that purpose. The workers that are doing that harvesting would not want to be traveling far. So retrofitting the buildings along the highway to residential areas. And, then after you'd need spaces, you'd need houses, you'd need so on and so forth. A lot of these spaces are already being appropriated. So for example, that H area, which is next to the highway, is currently being used as a soccer field. That wasn't the purpose originally, but people have appropriated it. And while this might seem a very irrational proposition, there is a firm in Kenya that's actually engaging with this idea of how can we convert highways that are masses of land dedicated to automobiles to actual livable spaces that are more beneficial to our cities. So a lot of architectural drawings and maps are quite disconnected from how people would like to understand how they move through the city. So I decided that I wanted to engage with this experience on the scale of 1-to-1. And I made a comic strip. And in this comic strip, each comic block represents a space, a place. And then how one gets from the different places is articulated through this key of different modes of transport. So I wanted to understand from a scale of 1-to-1, how would it feel to move through this proposition? How would it feel to move through Alexandra? And I did a narrative of, a girl like me, waking up in the morning, as opposed to the narrative of getting in your car, going to work, driving to the mall after work, going to the gym, driving back home. This is a different option. So she goes down, she gets mkomboti from a woman that's selling it on the street. Informal vending is a legitimate form in the African city. She has her own store where she does crafting for different clay pots, and someone comes and buys something from her. And then she takes a bicycle where there's a public open space currently not available, but would be for dibeke, which is a traditional indigenous sport. Then she can walk to a place where, there's a site for drinking water as opposed to buying a Coke or buying something that's not good for her. She can go and pick fruit from trees that are available in the city and have a space to relax without necessarily having to pay for it. And then inspired by the hawker who, was pushing a trolley with vegetables in it, what is the modern version of that? What is the, Afro-modern version of that? And maybe it's, a whole kind of new industrial kind of shop that can move, and she can just buy as she's walking home from, Vusi's grocery, which is kind of like a mini, maybe like a food truck, but not really. And then the last one is global realistic. Now, global realistic goes back to what is a realistic way of starting this today and right now. And historically, this is my last slide. Historically, in a lot of colonial African cities, only male trees were planted because they didn't want, the mess of the fruits that female trees produced. But when you don't have female trees, male trees they'll produce too much pollen, and pollen has a negative effect on the air quality in cities. So a lot of people have hay fever in cities because of a lack of female trees. But the introduction of female trees, which is a very simple thing, people in Alexandra are doing it right now. Number one, it can produce fruit, which is, free food or something that can be converted into a business, but it also improves the air quality in cities. And this can be implemented in South Africa. It can also be implemented in, in other African cities where, because of colonial urban planning, there's only male trees. So thank you. That is my work. Sorry if I spoke very fast. I've been told that sometimes I can speak a mile a minute, but I hope that you got it. And I'm really looking forward to your questions. Thank you, Stefano, again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Olu. It was very clear, fast but clear, very on the point. We got a lot of interesting intuition. I would ask Robert to start the discussion, if you don't mind. What's your impression? What do you think from the perspective of your experience?
Can everyone hear me? And my apologies for being, can you hear me? Shake your head, yes? Okay. My apologies for being outside, but I don't have any internet in the office where I work. First of all, thank you, Olive. That was a tremendous presentation and very inspiring. I guess as a speculative pragmatist, I sort of want to talk about the ways in which, I guess I would like to get your reaction to what stands in the way of some of your speculative and radical ideas from being implemented. And because they seem so, female trees seem so sensible and so easy. And in fact, people in Alexandra are doing it. I wonder what you think about the impediments that stand in the way of actually implementing these form follows sort of proposals. Is there any way that you can talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's a great question. So I have to speak from experience as well. I'm fresh out of varsity. I just graduated with my master's last year. I think it's both to my benefit and possibly my detriment that I haven't worked in an architectural firm before. I worked in property investment, I worked in graphic design, but I have yet to experience those kind of buffers that one experiences in practice of council drawings and getting things approved. So from secondhand understanding of what, my friends have told me, that's definitely one of the things, approval from council. But I also think that it's definitely a thing of scale, right? So planting a tree at a very small scale, I think, is something that's implementable. And I definitely think that a lot of architects underestimate that, because we always think that, you know, the catalyst for revolution has to be like a huge development, but it can literally be the planting of one tree in someone's backyard in Alexandra. But when you're talking about bigger scales and you're talking about highways, then obviously there's a lot of pragmatic things like government and, you know, who owns the land appropriation in South Africa is a really big thing. So I would say there's a lot of bureaucratic buffers, but I would definitely say that at a smaller scale, there's a lot of things that we can still do. I hope that answers your question, but I can go into further detail if you need.
No, that definitely answers the question. And just one other thought, and it's something that occurred to me in my travels actually out in the Navajo Nation, in Arizona in the United States, but they face a problem of restrictive laws that prevent things like businesses being set up on the side of the road. And one guy got around that by doing exactly what you propose in your slide there. He put his store on wheels. And every time they came to him to write him a ticket for having a fixed location without what is called a business site lease, he just moved it and avoided the ticket, set up business again, and they had to wait and ticket him again. But he's the only person that has successfully done this. No one has copied it. So it takes certain, radical pragmatists to implement this as well. So I just want to thank you again, and I'll let other people ask some other
Thank you.
That's a great point, Rob. I remember that in Italy it is pretty common. We also have this kind of system to skip the law. There is a restaurant where I live that actually started like that. It was totally legally put wheels and survive like that for a while. Then eventually it become legal. Marco Casagrande is an expert of these questions about building stuff that is real despite the law, in a way, in a certain sense. So Marco, do you have questions about that?
Yeah, hello everyone and greetings from Finland. Yeah, I'm Marco. And firstly, for the lady giving the presentation, so one thing that I would like to say that here is a lot. It's a lot of stuff, like a lot of details and a lot of observation, a lot of courage, a lot of things. In my point of view, so where I maybe should start, because that's my ground where I stand. So I'm an animist. That means that I really believe in nature. But it doesn't mean that I don't believe in human nature totally. But like in these your observations and illustrations, I see this discussion and conflict and some kind of war that is in between your highway and the more developed city, as they say. And then you have this Alexandria, which is more rooted to local knowledge, which you are touching upon as well with your diagrams and planting trees and so on. So just to be clear, local knowledge is one of the routes that leads down to understanding nature. And this modern development is leading to pollution, something that is a little bit against the life-providing system of nature. And So, well, planting of trees, they're small suggestions, but trusting on local knowledge. How does it really go? How was the first human to survive on this site? So that's like the starting point. And it's usually the modern man calls them natives, and that's or like savages or whatever, and that's like the bad word. On the other hand, you have the guy with the iMac who is the ultimate polluter, and just on the other side of the road. So this conflict is very interesting, and you are an operator, and like this operator who you are, you should not compare yourself to like a normal architectural army, but this is special forces now. So you've been somehow parachuted into this situation, and alone you are dealing with it, and this is interesting, and it's real. This is how things will work. Just one lady can change everything, but you mentioned about building permissions and so on, so forget all those talks. Just think you are special forces and work your own way. People will follow, things will change. Something like that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question myself, because you talk about free fruits, these three of fruits, and then you show this fountain, this free fountain where people could drink from. And this immediately made me think of experience I had in my youth. So it was pretty common in Rome to have free water, free fruits. You get free. So it was part of the city. The city came with this. And I found this concept in a book by Marwa Al-Saboni, who's a Syrian architect. She's a friend of us. She wrote this beautiful book called Building for Hope. And when she speaks about this concept of Middle Age and Middle East city, that is the generous city. The city must be generous, must be welcoming, make you feel good. That's a good city. She based that on ethical concept based on Islam, so the beautification as an ideal of Islam. But she says it's very common also in the Christian tradition, etc. But we have also in other tradition, other religious and ideals. And I think that's a thing that is totally missing nowadays in this decision between public and private. There is a third word that is missing, that is common. Because nowadays the public is just in service of the private. So what we call private is nothing that what is needed, strictly needed in order for the private to work and extract value. This idea of the malls, in fact, the entire cities are becoming huge malls. So machines to extract value from their inhabitants instead of giving them something. So I love your idea of fun. You gave a definition of fun, something not just for the immediate, because it could be, the entertainment life is a way of extracting value from us. Okay, all our life as entertainment. You mean something different. Can you go a little bit more deep on that? I would be very interested in that. The city you envision in this sense.
So if I understand the question correctly, do you want me to elaborate on the Form Follows Fun manifesto?
Yeah.
Or generally?
Yeah.
That one. Okay. Let me share my screen once again, just so I can speak from the drawing. Okay, so here it is, Form Follows Fun. So when I brought this word, when I brought this word fun up with my lecturers, I think all of us we laughed and we enjoyed it, because I think there's something about almost planning and being an adult that almost says that fun must be left. So fun means that you're not serious, but I think you can be serious and also have fun. And I think translating that into the city was my idea that, the pragmatics of getting through a city and how a city functions can be really well organized, but it can be something that's enjoyable. And I had fun as I was doing this drawing. So, you know, I'll talk about some of the things in the drawing that I consider fun. Let me read from the definition. From my definition: form at multiple scales and meanings, from the molecular construct of things to the choreography of the body to the physical tangible forms of buildings, must be fun. Fun fundamentally means to be enjoyable for the short and long term, and thus disallows any constructs that must be enjoyable now but would have latent detrimental effects. Because fun and joy is subjective, it calls for a variety of options. So I'll talk about the oranges, because the oranges was like a really fun thing. So if you see on the bottom right-hand corner, these are people that are harvesting. They're harvesting oranges or oranges from the top of the trees, because the idea is that once the oranges fall on the ground, they're free, but they can be harvested from the top of the trees, because the ground is public, so everybody can take from the ground, but the top people have to harvest. And then it flows down kind of like this chute, and then it goes to an underground kind of, you know, production, and then that's converted to orange juice, which is a vending machine that someone gets in the city on the other side. But the idea of even oranges falling down a chute and people sitting in a public space and watching that as the production of something also being fun was just kind of like a really interesting idea. Like, what if the pragmatic production of orange juice could be integrated in the city, and it could be something that people watch, just oranges falling down a chute. And I can go into this drawing for hours about all of the fun stuff. There's like a slide from a school that's in a tree that you slide down to ground level. Just a lot of things about how, you know, right now sitting in traffic for 2 hours is not fun for anybody. Eating food that makes you sick is not fun for anybody in the long term. But a city where, you know, to get from one place to another place is a joy as opposed to a pain is something that I really wanted to explore, and I really think is possible. Because, for example, a very pragmatic example right now is that South Africa a couple of years ago implemented the Gautrain, which is this at the bottom here. And when I was living in Pretoria but going to school in Joburg, I took the Gautrain every single day. And it was a wonderful experience, because as opposed to either sitting in a car or being in traffic, on the Gautrain, there's people from different socioeconomic classes. So it's such an equalizer, and you can sit and you can have conversations and you can see the city. So it's not impossible. It's something that's happening now. We just need more of it. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does beautifully. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We have a lot of experts of architecture, and I'm really embarrassed because we are from different countries, different tradition, etc. If somebody wants to put a question to Olive. They are shy. I mean, all of them are professors, actually. I see.
Can I?
Eleni.
Yeah, hi.
From the UK.
Yeah. Hi, Olive. I found really very interesting your conversation and your presentation, because in the last, let's say, couple of years, been a lot on online interaction with professionals, with other students from other universities, because I teach in a UK university. I found out that younger generations, they see that fun in the cities is missing, not only in Africa, it could be all around the world. So I'm keen really to understand you younger generations on what you feel it would be a message to local policy makers anyway, on local authorities, on how they could help with regulating that fun being included in cities. Because at the time being, and after all these bad things we had with COVID-19 restrictions, etc., I saw that mental health issues for younger generations have increased really, and this is bad. And it's not only in the so-called Western countries, it's everywhere in the world. This cut of communication, transportation, mixing up, all these things have been missed. So what would be your case, like a younger generation professional and a person who wants to see fun implemented in planning? What you would suggest it would be the method to approach local authorities and make them participant in that? Because communities especially, they need to be healthier, happier, etc. And I see your point of view on the production of food, juices, and things that can be good health and happiness for the people. But how you think this message could be put to these people, that they have to legislate, they have to put some order in their planning instead of having only informal attitudes, you know, because we start with informal, but at some point we have to be participants in a way without pestering each other's space and place. One thing is that, and the other thing that was a bit of an issue for me is this big barrier of this boulevard, which is some kind of boundary separating the informal city and the so-called formal, which at some point, can you see these two parts be blending in a way? Because that's my main issue. Instead of keeping the boundary there, keeping a kind of informality as a background, I should like also people that they are more formal to become more informal in a way and start mixing up. So to my opinion, what you said about transportation and transport, you know, this is, the public transport is an issue that should be more integrated in the way we live today, instead of having all the private cars, private moves, and all these things. So how you would see these messages passing? Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic question. Thank you very, very much for the question. I hope I can do justice to it. There's so many things that I want to respond to. So I think the first thing that I'll say is that I don't have experience with engaging with policymakers. So everything that I say now is possibly, you know, speculative, which can be good or can be maybe not so good. So my first point is that I think, and this may be a dangerous thing to say, but sometimes I feel as though policymakers operate in a way that they almost assume as though people are disorderly and they have to tell people how to be orderly. And sometimes I really don't feel as though that's the case. I feel as though people within the city actually know how things are functioning. And it is the policymakers' first responsibility to actually humble themselves and understand how things are working. For example, in Lagos, if you go to Lagos, which is one of the busiest cities, you know, in Africa, in Nigeria, from the outside looking in, you may assume that, oh, this is just chaos. You know, there's no order here. Everything is all over the place. But the people that are within the system, they really know how it works. So, you know, it's possible that maybe we allow people to actually do things and develop things, and then we develop the policy after the fact. I don't know. Maybe, because based on talking to a lot of informal hawkers and a lot of people that set things up, they know how to actually work around things. They know how to make things, but it is our responsibility to come in afterwards and say, okay, this is how people are doing it. Let's put infrastructure to support what they're already doing, as opposed to say, this is how you must do something. This is the infrastructure to make it happen. So I think that's the first thing. observe what people are doing and then, you know, make things after that to support that, as opposed to say, vendor, you can't set up here. The vendor is already telling you people are working here. People walk in the morning and they need food here. The responsibility of the policymakers is not to say, don't do this here. The responsibility is say, okay, this is working. How can we set something up so that this person can actually do even better than they're doing? So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which I was investigating with shopping malls, is how shopping malls use tactics of seduction at multiple scales, in terms of the color coding of things, in terms of, you know, how things are set up. There's a science to the emotional and manipulation of making people like things. And I don't want to say this in a way that we must manipulate policymakers, but I think policymakers, you know, I think they are also subject to being excited and inspired. And I think if we use the right imagery and the right way of communicating, we can show them the vision. And if they can have a clarity of the vision, then they might also be convinced. So, you know, if possibly the way that we're trying to convince them right now is through a letter that describes everything that we want to do, they might not be convinced. But if we have, you know, something that's also really exciting, something that also is speculative, then I think they're human beings too that also want to be excited. For the people that are just in it for capitalism and want to extract people, there's a, you know, there's a dance to that, where you have to talk to them about how they'll financially gain from it and so on and so forth. But I think imagery, which is a really good architectural tool, is a really fantastic way of getting people convinced of something, because when they can see it, they can believe it, and then they can possibly start to implement things. And the last thing that I will say is that the urban planning trajectory, or the planning method, it's not before and after, it's an ongoing thing. Informality and formality is not a before and after thing. It's something that's almost like a back and forth dance. You know, something informal happens, then you build something formal, then another thing of the formal thing is appropriated. It's an ongoing thing. I think we must stop pretending as though this is the thing that's built, this is how it's going to be used, and we build it and it's done. You know, the design process doesn't end after the thing is constructed. A lot of things happen after that, and if we allow that and accommodate that and see that as something that's beneficial as opposed to something that's detrimental to the building, then I think we can start talking about what you're talking about, this blend of formal and informal. Architects and urban planners are not the only people that live in the city. The people who live in the city should also have the right to autonomously, you know, implement what they think should go on a building, how a building should be used, I think. And if we allow, because I think, let me show this. Hopefully it'll move because it wasn't moving before. But so this is a key that's supposed to indicate that there are so many people that experience the city, the person that's driving, the person that's in the passenger seat, the person that's building. And if we include all of these people in the conversation, I think we'll get a lot better results than what we're currently getting. So yeah, that was a lot, but I hope it answers the question.
Amazing. Thank you, Olive. Thank you, Eleni, for the very good question. Eleni is an expert also in participation in design. So she organized at the university a beautiful meeting about scholars, about how people self-build, self-design, and find solution. Marco is also an expert. I think you want to say something. Go ahead, Marco.
Yeah. I think in this way that when you are thinking of ways how to communicate with people and how to communicate with authorities, so you are getting closer to something which we call language. And of course, architecture has some sort of languages and communicative action and communicative construction. Actually, construction is a very good language, but you still need to remember that there is only one full language, which is nature. That's the only full language. So like local knowledge is still hooked up with that. That's the power of local knowledge. And that's how you are crossing this highway. And if you are linked to local knowledge and linked to the more or less like a only full language, complete language of nature. So then basically everything is solved. But like, yeah, that's the big question. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I can quickly just speak to that, a language is definitely a big thing. I didn't get into it, but my thesis is called Architecture as Language. And I think it's definitely a dialogue. We should definitely have more dialogues with nature. I think nature already kind of tells us how it wants to be treated. But a lot of capitalism, consumerism says, no, this is how it should function. A tree shouldn't take this long to grow. A fruit shouldn't take this long to grow. But nature is already telling us how it naturally functions. And if we stop being in opposition to that and rather try to develop methodologies that work in harmony with that, then we'll be in a much better place. So yeah, architecture's language between people, between nature, between, person to person, architects to people, because sometimes architects feel like they just speak their own language and we disconnect everybody else from the conversation. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
May I just say something?
Of course, Neely, welcome.
You, yeah, well, it's refreshing really to, it brings us, like 50 years back, which is very nice. I just wanted to suggest you, because I was really impressed, and, I've been talking like you 50 years ago, and I think also along the last 50 years, and never give up. I mean, what I wanted to say is that you always have to remember that architecture is made for people, not for the people who employ you, but the users. And but reality will show you, obviously, that each how would I say, each partner in the whole creation of architecture has their own interest, which is fair enough. I mean, the developer wants to earn as much money as he can. The clerks and all the bureaucracy thinks about other parameters, which is fair enough. But you have to think only about the users, and each one will push in their side, and eventually there will be sort of a compromise. But you don't have to play the role of the people who want to earn money or want to, I don't know, other things, which has nothing really whatsoever to do with, how people will really feel in the environment. And I want to tell you something, which is, when I was teaching for many years, and my students, I was trying to tell them what I tell you, and to show them other methodologies and ways of thinking. And they said, well, but once we will work for authorities, developers, they will not let us do what you are trying to teach us to do. And I said what I told you just now. I mean, that's you have to push from your side, what you believe in will be good for the people, and they will push from their side. You have to be aware of it. I mean, don't think that you are the only a player in this game, but never give up. And I think that maybe even you will lose some clients. That's fair enough, but eventually that you did what you believe in, and it's really for the benefit of the people. What I would like to suggest you, I don't know if you, along your way, you were aware of, the pattern language and the timeless way of building and all the school of thought of Christopher Alexander, because, he actually tried, to work with the people and show tools. Even the pattern language is actually meant to be a language that connects all the players in the game in a very, accessible way, in very simple way, because the idea of the pattern language was that the architects and the bureaucrats and the planners and the users will have a common language, you know, among them. Because now, of course, I mean, if you show people like drawings, they can never read drawings. I mean, you know, I mean, if you want really them to participate, so you have to create a language which is, you know, coherent and accessible for the layman, for everybody. And I think, I don't know, maybe you went through it, but if not, I really think it's a must, you know, get hold of the pattern language and all this school of thought, which I think is, when I heard you, I think it is in line with the things that you now think, but don't get spoiled. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll definitely check that out.
Okay, so I think we made a very good meeting. There are a lot of seats in the air. Thank you very much, Olive. I'm very impressed, very happy. Let's keep in touch. You know, possibly we're going to publish a work by Olive in the Journal of Biourbanism. The next issue is coming in the next months. And let's see what's going on. The network is growing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bravo.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Good luck.
Thank you.